All right, hi everyone. Welcome to College Convention put forth by New England College here in Manchester, New Hampshire, home of the First in the Nation primary. My name is Josh McKelvin. I am going to be moderating this debate between Marianne Williamson and Dean Phillips. Thank you both for participating, what you're doing, and throwing your hat in the ring. Woo! All right, quick background. I'm going to introduce Marianne Williamson first. She's a prominent author, public speaker, well known for your message of empowerment and philanthropy. This is actually your second presidential bid, having ran back in 2020, but wound up endorsing Bernie Sanders. You guys just welcomed Marianne Williamson, so let's talk about her opponent, three-term Minnesota Congressman, Dean Phillips. He is a successful businessman with ventures ranging from a distillery to gelato. That's diverse.
I know what Americans like.
He's father of two daughters, married, and is worth noting that he is a Gold Star child. He was 6 months old when his father was killed in Vietnam. We certainly appreciate his service as well. Please welcome Dean Phillips and Marianne Williamson once again.
Thanks, everybody.
All right, 90 seconds the candidates will have for an opening statement, and we're going to begin with Congressman Phillips.
Josh, thank you, and hello, conventioneers. I want to thank you all for being here. But I'm going to start by saying the quiet part out loud, and that is Americans want to turn the page from Donald Trump and Joe Biden. And I suspect most of you in this room want to turn the page to the future. We all know that. But I don't believe everybody knows that the truth is, if that election happened today between Trump and Biden, Donald Trump wins. It's the truth. Joe Biden has the lowest approval numbers in modern history. He's losing in every battleground state. The last Wall Street Journal poll shows him losing to Donald Trump by 4 points and losing to Nikki Haley by 17 points. So I believe in winning, and I believe the Democrats are sleepwalking into disaster. Why? Because the Democratic Party right now is trying to pursue a coronation instead of a competition. And that is why I celebrate my friend and esteemed colleague here, Marianne Williamson. And why are Americans angry? Why are Americans angry? Well, life is unaffordable. We've got chaos at our southern border in many cities in our country. We have wars overseas. People are sick of dysfunction and division and nonsense, the lack of common sense in Washington, D.C. And if you're like me, you're probably really disgusted with both parties right now, really disgusted. And I understand that because I'm one of you. I'm part of the exhausted majority of the United States of America. I'm also a father, I'm a husband, and I'm a Gold Star son. I lost my dad in the Vietnam War in 1969. I'm an entrepreneur, I've led businesses, I chaired the board of the health system, I was a regent at a university, I'm a three-term member of Congress. I'm the second most bipartisan member of Congress. That includes all the governors too, by the way.
Got to wrap it up, sir.
And I'm also, I'm sorry?
Almost out of time.
Oh, okay. Well, and I'm also a former member of House Democratic leadership. I woke up the morning after the 2016 election. My daughters were in tears. I promised them I would do something. I flipped a district that had been red for 60 years, made it a Democratic district, and now I'm doing the same thing to beat Donald Trump once again. I will beat either one of the GOP nominees. I will return decency and common sense to the White House. I will reduce costs. I will reduce chaos and restore the American dream. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you, Congressman. Appreciate it. Ms. Williamson, take a few extra seconds if you'd like.
Thank you. Thank you for having me here. I'm running for president because for the last 50 years, there has been a war on the middle class in this country. In the 1970s, the average American couple could afford a house. They could afford a car. They could afford a yearly vacation. One salary could support a family of four. One parent could afford to stay home with the children, and they could afford to send their kids to college. That was called a thriving middle class. You cannot have a thriving democracy where there is no thriving middle class. But all that has changed, and that middle class has collapsed. And that was strategized. Over the last 50 years, there has been a $50 trillion transfer of wealth from the bottom 90% of Americans to the top 1%. So that now a majority of Americans live paycheck to paycheck. A majority of Americans cannot afford to absorb a $500 unexpected expenditure. 70% of Americans say that they live with chronic economic insecurity and anxiety. bound by the invisible chains of economic stress. And that is the new status quo in America. And that is because the government itself is held hostage by corporations. We are no longer functioning as a government of the people, by the people, and for the people. Abraham Lincoln said that the men who died at Gettysburg died so that that dream would not perish from the earth, but it is perishing now. We're a government of the corporations and by the corporations and for the corporations. A matrix of corporate overlords that own Washington and control this country. From insurance companies to pharmaceutical companies to big food companies, big agricultural companies, big chemical companies, gun manufacturers, big oil and defense contractors. They have turned Washington into a system of legalized bribery. That status quo, that unholy alliance between government and corporate power will not disrupt itself. It is time for the people to step in.
Thank you very much, ma'am. Appreciate that. Please hold your applause to the end of the debate. Appreciate it. We're going to get to the questions now. You're both campaigning here in New Hampshire. The president's name is not on the ballot. He sent a letter yesterday saying New Hampshire's meaningless. Would you characterize this congressman as voter suppression?
Yes. In fact, I have that letter right here. I hope it goes in the National Archives on display because I think it's one of the most egregious affronts to democracy I've ever seen in my entire lifetime as an American, period. And I'll tell you by the way, voter ID, if every American could easily get an ID, that's different. But the fact of the matter, if you are disabled or you are elderly or you live in a rural area where it's really hard, it's nonsensical. So that's voter suppression. But you know what else is voter suppression? What's happening right here. What's happening in Florida, what's happening in North Carolina, what they're trying to do in Massachusetts and other states. The Democratic Party should be investing in democracy, promoting debate, promoting candidates, and promoting voters. What are they doing? They're suppressing them. I'm not a conspiracy theorist. I'm an affable, decent, common sense person that is telling you the truth. I know Marianne knows exactly the same thing. And your generation, all of you in this room, please take note. The parties are destroying democracy, period.
Thank you. Ms. Williamson, same question for you.
Well, what Dean just said is absolutely correct. There is candidate suppression going on here. The DNC has decided and has been very overt about it. Joe Biden would be their candidate. Candidate suppression is a form of voter suppression. Every American should be automatically registered at the age of 18. Voting day should be on Saturday. Voting day should be a holiday. We should be doing everything possible to make it so that every American of voting age has their voice expressed. So anytime, any way that there is a way of shutting people down, then that is a danger to our democracy. The political parties traditionally stood behind, they stood in the back, and the people decided who would be the candidate. It should be you, the people of New Hampshire, the people of every other state should decide who is the best Democratic nominee to beat either Donald Trump or Nikki Haley. However, what's going on now is the suppression, shutting down primaries, as Dean was saying. In my case, the invisibilization of my campaign in general, because there's a political media industrial complex. This is not the vision of the founders. There's not supposed to be a political elite or a political class. And let's be very clear. Thomas Jefferson said, the only safe repository for power in the United States is in the hands of the people, not the hands of those guys. And their idea that they've got this, like they got this in 2016. They don't got this. You do. And we do. Thank you
very much. And that makes three of us, by the way. All right, moving on. Let's talk about the economy. A lot of kids in this room are in college and be joining the workforce soon. It's got to be a little bit daunting. Big picture, and I know it's hard to summarize in a minute. What's your economic plan so that the next generation can enjoy the same opportunities that we have? Ma'am, please.
I have an economic bill of rights, which was based on an economic bill of rights that was articulated by Franklin Roosevelt. Universal health care, which the majority of Republicans as well as Democrats want, and which is given to the citizens of every other advanced democracy. Universal health care, cancellation of the college loan debt because they should never have existed. Tuition-free college and tech school, also given to the citizens of every other advanced democracy, and which we had in this country until the 1970s. Subsidized childcare. care, paid family leave, guaranteed sick pay, and a guaranteed living wage. Here in New Hampshire, you've still got a minimum wage of $7.25 an hour. A living wage in New Hampshire is a $17 an hour living wage. We now have 39% of Americans who report that they regularly skip meals because it's the only way that they can afford housing. We also need a domestic Marshall Plan to repair this country. The way our economy works today, and Washington too often in cahoots with the trickle-down nonsense that causes this unjust economy, is ruining people's lives. And when I'm president, we're going to repair these lives, and we're going to repair our democracy, and we're going to repair our country.
Thank you, ma'am. Next question for you, sir. What's your economic plan?
Well, let me start at birth. I want to start something called the American Dream Accounts, where every single baby born in America starts his or her life with a $1,000 account, can add $500 a year. By the time you're 18 years old and you graduate high school, that money is yours to become an owner of a business, of a home. And if you do some national service for a year after high school, that's another $10,000. I think we've got to be a country from the beginning of our lives until the very end, we take care of people. That also means housing. We are 7 million houses shy in the United States of America. We need to produce, and we can. Healthcare for all. We spend twice as much as any nation in the world. Our outcomes are mid-pack, and we let pharmaceutical companies charge us multiples of anybody in the world. Healthcare for all through Medicare for all. Education for all. Why are we a country that has $1.7 trillion in college debt, costing some of you in this room $90 billion a year? It's nonsensical. And then Social Security towards the end of life. Ensure it exists, if it needs to be amplified. And then most importantly, to create a fund by which those who've been successful can rededicate their Social Security benefits into a pool to share with those who are most vulnerable retirees in America. I sat in North Conway, New Hampshire just a couple weeks ago with two wonderful elderly ladies who make cereal the last 3 nights of the month because they don't have enough Social Security. $100 more a month makes all the difference. That's the kind of country we will be under my presidency.
Thank you, sir. Please. Moving on now to immigration. Obviously, New Hampshire's a ways from the southern border, but it's in our living rooms every night on TV as we see a record number of migrants crossing. Democratic mayors are saying that they need a breather from the busloads that are showing up. So my question to both of you, I'm going to start with you, Congressman. Mm-hmm. What can be done in the short term to address the issue that many believe also has national security implications?
Sure. Well,
and further out, how do we improve the process overall?
Let me start with this. Most of you in this room, not all, but most of you in this room had foremothers and forefathers that came to this country for the same reason that mine did. In my case, a Jewish family escaping pogroms in Eastern Europe in the late 19th century. But this country is about immigration. We must remain that way. We must welcome and promote and encourage the best and brightest around the world, people who want to pursue the American dream. I'm a Democrat who will tell you, having been to the southern border twice, it is an unmitigated, shameful, inexcusable disaster. And it is a national security issue. The foremost priority of an American president is to keep this country secure. We spend $1 trillion a year on our military, and yet tens of thousands of people per day are approaching our border because our asylum law is so ridiculous. A failure of Democrats and Republicans for generations. Under my presidency, we will have border security, northern border and southern border. Most importantly, a humane immigration policy that welcomes new Americans and changes the asylum policy so that people declare asylum, have it adjudicated in their country of origin, and save the $10,000 that they are spending now with Mexican cartels to bring them across the border. That's how the United States should operate.
Same question for you, ma'am, the immigration.
We must deal with the immigration problem on the level of both symptom and cause. On the level of symptom, Congress has failed us miserably, not just presidents. We need to have the proper infrastructure so that people can be interviewed for asylum. If they have the establishment of credible fear, then of course they are moved on to their next step, getting into integration into American society. If not, they must go home to their country of origin. But no wall is going to fix this. No surveillance system is going to fix this. We need to address root causes. Why are so many people in such desperate straits that they're trying to get here? U.S. foreign policy is involved. There are two main categories, economic devastation, and America needs to admit to itself how much our own policies in Latin America over the last few decades contributed mightily to the destabilization of so many of those economies. We have to be willing to help restabilize. We need to, above all, we need to remove the sanctions in Venezuela and the sanctions in Cuba. Secondly, as Dean mentioned, people are seeking to escape the violence of the drug cartels. The United States of America needs to end the war on drugs. This is not helping at the southern border. It will actually help at the southern border to remove the black market that these drug cartels depend on. As president, I will not only on this issue, but on many issues, not just address symptoms in a transactional way, but address root causes in a transformational way.
Next question follows up on that. Thank you, ma'am. Appreciate it, please. For a number of years now, polls indicate the number one public health and safety issue Granite Staters are facing is the crisis of addiction. Certainly New Hampshire's not alone. Fentanyl, though, surpassing numbers of those lost in Vietnam overall. It's a real problem. Again, Ms. Williamson, to you, do you think we're nearing a point where a public health emergency needs to be declared along the lines of the COVID-19 pandemic?
Whether we declare it or not, drug addiction is a public health emergency, and that is the way we need to treat it. We need to stop treating drug addiction as a criminal issue. We need to treat it as a health issue. Most addicts want to get sober. We have spent $1 trillion since 1971, the beginning of the drug war, which was bogus to begin with, and Richard Nixon knew that. It has not in any way solved the problem. It has exacerbated it. Among other things, 46% of our federal prisoners are nonviolent drug offenders. They should be home with their children. For the $100 billion that we spend now on the drug war, we can have a world-class network of recovery options. Many presidents have a drug czar. I want to have a recovery czar. I want to bring recovery, getting people back their lives on the issue of addiction as on everything else in order that we can begin again. That will, by the way, release the energy, the resources, and the bandwidth that we need to go after the one that's the real problem, and that is fentanyl.
Thank you, ma'am. Congressman?
Of course we have an addiction problem in this country because we have economic despair, we have hopelessness, we have anger, disenfranchisement, oppression. It's part of the human condition, and prohibition usually never works. We're also a country that spends $1 trillion a year back again to the military budget. And yet we're suffering the loss of 100,000 Americans to addiction overdoses, 50,000 to gun violence. And yet we're dedicating all this money overseas to protecting our country. Why don't we start protecting ourselves? A mental and emotional health care system, a system of not just treatment, as Marianne said, but recovery. We underinvest. And then we don't find paths to success afterwards. This is about being a compassionate country, a country that cares, but most importantly, a country that solves problems. And as a member of Congress for 3 terms, let me tell you, the dysfunction is obscene, all predicated on the fact that the entire culture is predicated on returning to your seat in Congress, not solving problems. There's no reward for it. That's the only reason I've torpedoed my career, to step out of that nonsense, lead the country as its executive, and tell you the truth, saying the quiet part out loud.
Thank you, sir. Next question goes back to you. Yesterday, a Biden campaign official indicated that if he wins a second term, top priority will be abortion. What's your top priority if you win?
My top priority...
No, I'm sorry, Congressman.
Oh, I'm sorry. Forgive me.
Well, let me start by saying I'm 150% pro-choice. I believe in freedom. I believe in liberty. I believe government should have nothing to do with what a woman does with her body, particularly men, period. With that said, it is a very important issue. And by the way, Democrats should have codified reproductive rights into law when we had the chance in past years. That's the beginning. Under my presidency, that will be done. But economic despair. Costs are out of control. People cannot afford their lives. 60% of Americans are living paycheck to paycheck. 40% cannot afford a $400 emergency. That is why Joe Biden is losing and will lose to Donald Trump. He is not listening to what is going on in America. It's not about GDP growth. Most of that accrues to the 1% of Americans who have 32% of the wealth. People cannot afford their lives. I want every one of you in this room to live the American dream. And that's why under my administration, that is job 1, 2, and 3.
Thank you. Same question for you, ma'am. Sorry, we're going back and forth.
We were talking about abortion was the original
Talking
question.
about abortion, but that's Joe Biden said that was going to be his top priority, a campaign official. what will your top priority be?
My top priority, the first thing I will do is to cancel the Willow Project. The next thing I will do is to cancel every contract that the U.S. government has with union busting companies. Next thing I will do is I will audit every cent of the Pentagon, and I assume that they will lose it again, that they will fail in that audit. Next thing I will do is I will call together the nation's greatest experts on early childhood. I want to establish a Department of Children and Youth. The 90% of a child's brain is developed in the first 5 years. If we want this country to be thriving in 20 years, we need to give a lot more attention to 10-year-olds today. I will also, during that beginning phase of my presidency, I will be establishing a Department of Peace. We need to be as sophisticated and as organized in the ways we wage peace to prevent war as we are sophisticated and organized in the ways of waging war when we feel we must. We will have a peace academy as well as a military academy. We will have an army of peace builders as well as an army of military personnel, so that both cities in America as well as cities where we have influence around the world, we will help to wage peace and declare peace and save human civilization for future generations.
Quick follow-up. I got to know, what does a peace academy look like?
Well, peace building actually is a real thing. There are 4 factors which, when present, statistically indicate there will be a higher incidence of peace and a lower incidence of violence. None of these will surprise you. Number 1, greater economic opportunities for women.
Quickly.
Number 2, greater educational opportunities for children. Number 3, a reduction of violence against women. And number 4, a reduction in unnecessary human despair. When those elements are present, what you have is for people who are thriving. When people are thriving, there is greater peace. Large groups of desperate people are a national security risk. They form a petri dish out of which all manner of personal and societal dysfunction arises almost inevitably, including vulnerability to ideological capture by genuinely psychotic forces.
Thank you.
If I could respond quickly.
Follow-ups. Try to keep it to about 30 seconds. And of course,
30 seconds. And I admire that, and investing in peace, because Americans in the world are sick of war. We all know that. When I'm president, I'm going to do something quite different. I'm going to have a team of rivals in the White House, just like Abraham Lincoln did. I will have a bipartisan cabinet so that every American knows that their voice is heard in the White House. Probably equally important to all of you in this room, I will have the country's first youth cabinet, a college or high school student from every one of our 50 states who meet on a quarterly basis with me as president to share your perspectives on AI, social media regulation, climate change, gun violence prevention. You've got better ideas than the lobbyists, from whom I don't take any money, by the way. So come visit me in Washington.
All right, thank you, sir. Let's shift to foreign policy now. Plenty there to talk about, right? Ms. Williamson, how would your administration handle Russia's invasion of Ukraine in contrast to how the Biden administration has handled it?
Well, first of all, the United States does not have clean hands when it comes to how we dealt with NATO in the run-up to the invasion and our Aegis missiles in Poland and elsewhere. However, none of that justifies the atrocious behavior of Vladimir Putin. For that reason, the fact that I do feel that the United States needs to take a stand, that people such as Vladimir Putin we do not need them thinking they can just grab a piece of a country as they want to. At the beginning, I was with President Biden on this. Where I was not with him was on the line for as long as it takes. There has always had to be a negotiated settlement. We were all hoping that the counteroffensive staged by the Ukrainians would work, that it would push back the Russians. It hasn't. So that now we're in a stalemate. Now we're in a war of attrition. I do believe that it's time. There is no guarantee that if we continue with this, that Ukraine will do better. There is no guarantee of that. Vladimir Putin said that he wants to talk. And when I am president, I will receive military analysis that no civilian has. If I receive the military analysis that leads me to believe that what I just said is 100% true, I will be open to a conversation with Vladimir Putin.
Thank you, ma'am. Do you agree with her, sir?
Well, I agree that everything we're going to talk about today should have been solved upstream. We could have prevented so many of the problems we're facing right now, both domestically and overseas. In 2014, when Joe Biden was vice president, he let Putin walk right into Crimea and took it with impunity. Nothing to prevent it, nothing to do anything about it. And what does Putin do? We all know this. He takes an inch, he waits, and if no response, then he'll take a mile. This was all predictable. All predictable. So the answer is it should have been prevented years ago, but here we are now. And yes, we should help Ukraine defend itself because he is a tyrant, he is a disaster, and he is a very dangerous man. This is the most important part. My dad died in Vietnam. It was an unnecessary, sickening war. But the world then saw the United States gave up because it was a bad decision to begin with. They saw us exit Afghanistan in a total chaotic mess. And if we exit our support from Ukraine right now, mark my words, our adversaries around the world are watching. And if they see the United States once again fold, if they see us fold, we're in big trouble. So I wish this had never happened. I wish we were not spending tens of billions of dollars again litigating a war when we should be investing in American people and all of you in this room. That's why I serve on the Foreign Affairs Committee. I'm the ranking member of the Middle East, North Africa, and Central Asia Subcommittee, because this is the most important investment of our lifetimes to make sure that we have peace around the world.
Stay with you, Congressman. Perhaps even more complex situation involving Hamas, Israel, Palestinians. How would your administration be different from the president's?
Well, look, I respect Joe Biden, but he's been in Washington for 50 years. He is part of a generation of people in Washington who've done nothing else but serve in Washington. And they're looking at this crisis in the Middle East the same way after Israel was founded, the same bloodshed, the same cycle of violence for 75 years. And that's why I'm saying it's time for change. We need new leaders from the West Bank to the West Wing. And I think that's really important. I deeply love Israel. I'm a Jewish man. My family escaped pogroms. The Holocaust was real. And Jewish people need a place of refuge because when they came to the United States during the Holocaust, we were turned away. There needs to be a Jewish state. Benjamin Netanyahu is not a good man. The settlement policy, a disgusting policy. His cabinet, awful. But Hamas has got to be destroyed. They are keeping 8 American hostages right now, my friends. Every morning and every night, the United States president should be referring to the 8 Americans being held by this terrorist organization. As the first Jewish president in America, I will sign documents supporting and recognizing a Palestinian state because we need 2 states. We need peace and prosperity for the Jewish people in Israel and Palestinian people in Palestine. Under my presidency, we will get it done.
Thank you, sir. Same question for you on Israel-Palestine.
I agree with everything that Dean said. We need to have an immediate ceasefire. I called for the ceasefire before it even began. We do need a full release of those hostages. Remember, some of those hostages are American, by the way. I will find out, is there a way that there is any behavior, any action on the part of the United States that could bring them home? And also, then, as Dean said, we need to get immediately to the architecture for a 2-state solution. It is absolutely the only solution.
Thank you very much. If you guys want to take a quick sip of water, I want to give a shout out to one of our sponsors that college convention wouldn't be possible without, and that's AARP. Thank you very much, ma'am. And the next question does come from AARP, starting with you, Marianne Williamson. If lawmakers don't take action to protect and save Social Security over the next 10 years, Social Security could be cut by 20%, an average of $4,000 a year. This is a program that workers rely on when they retire or become disabled. And it's also important to families when a worker passes away. As president, what will you do to protect Social Security for Americans 50 plus, their children, their grandchildren, and so on?
We should lift the cap to $250,000. Then also, remember, our seniors, half of our seniors are living on less than $25,000 a year. For everyone who is over 65 and older, there should be, if your Social Security does not get to the level of $1,200, you will be at the level of $1,200. This is particularly an issue for older women because many women didn't pay into Social Security. Their work was unearned, unpaid labor. It was raising children. It was taking care of homes. So every senior should receive that $1,200. And that is how we will not only save Social Security, but it's also how we will save the dignity and the lives and the well-being of our elders.
Thank you very much. Same question for you, sir.
Well, Social Security is the most successful anti-poverty program in human history. Mm-hmm. And it is not one that we can let go under. We might make sure that it's solvent and that, as you just said, Josh, it will be reducing benefits by 25% in the 2030s, coming up soon, if we don't do something, because we've had such demographic shifts in America. How do we solve it? Just like Marianne said, we have a very regressive tax right now in place, a cap of about $160,000 a year, meaning if you make $200,000, you're paying a lot less in Social Security percentage than someone making $160,000. We should move the cap to $250,000. That will extend the program through the 2040s. And then, as I just said earlier in this debate, I want to establish a mechanism to make Americans philanthropists. There are millions of Americans who have been successful, do not need their Social Security. If they knew they could dedicate their annual Social Security to a pool that would be redistributed to the lowest 10% of recipients, that would make a meaningful difference in the lives of millions of retirees and give them dignity. That should be the promise of America.
Okay, our next question comes from a college student. You're smiling there. This one, we're going to start with you on this one, Congressman. Take it away, man.
Hi, so my name is Olivia Brimmer. I use they, them pronouns. I'm a senior political science student at New England College. Most candidates that have visited NEC have mentioned the rising cost of college and the increase in student debt. So my question is, how, as president, how would you address this rising cost and how would you fund that initiative?
Mm-hmm. So Olivia, first and foremost, we should be a nation that ensures that young people who have an interest in higher education to pursue their American dream can do so without being burdened by debt. $1.7 trillion, $90 billion a year in interest. It is obscene. If we are a country of freedom and liberty and capitalism, we should be investing in education, not tormenting and burdening people with extraordinary amounts of debt. Near term, I'd like to absolve the debt of anybody who has it and is willing to pursue a career in some type of public service by serving our country somehow. I think we should start with that. How to pay for college to make sure no one has to? I would take the top 15 endowments of the top universities in America have $326 billion. What should we do? It's time for an excise tax, the Ivy League excise tax. That alone can help pay for college for everybody because the aggregation of that money is obscene, absurd, and it has got to be shared.
College affordability. How do you go? Please, keep you.
I like the idea of that excise tax, but let's look at the larger picture here. We should be setting our young people up to win, not cutting them off at their knees. How predatory is that we have turned the desperation of young people to simply self-actualize and better their lives into a profit center? Before the 1970s, there was a tuition-free and near tuition-free system in this country. It was in Florida, University of Texas, University of California. And then this ugly unholy economic alliance between banks and lending companies and an educational institution and the government in order to create these loans. It is predatory. It is preying on our young people. That's why I will use the Higher Education Act to get rid of them completely. How many of our young people would love nothing more than a $2,500 discretionary expenditure? We have kids who are coming out of college so loaded. And by the way, when I was in, debt is crippling no matter how old you are. But to be in your 20s carrying tens of thousands of dollars of college loan debt, this country should be ashamed of itself. And how do we pay for it? In other countries, what they do is this. You go as high as your achievement level will take you. Then later, when the government can see on your taxes that you are beginning to make, you're doing fine, and that money can start being paid back to the government without impacting your quality of life, then the government starts paying itself back. This is one of the most egregious transgressions of the U.S. government on parts of the population of the United States.
Thank you, ma'am.
Shame on us for doing this to our young.
Listen, I appreciate the applause and I appreciate the enthusiasm you guys have for the candidates, but to make sure they can hear me and each other, please hold it until the end. Plus, we have a lot of microphones in here, and this is being broadcast all over the world. Thank you. I can't help but notice you guys agree on a lot of different things, and I'm not trying to start a food fight.
And we're not trying to what?
I'm not trying to start a food fight. So, but you do have to show contrast. Ma'am, we'll start with you. Why are you the person that can beat Joe Biden and then win the presidency?
We are not going to win the presidency by warning people about Donald Trump. People who like Donald Trump, they're going to vote for Donald Trump. The way we're going to win in 2024, first of all, let me tell you what the danger is for Democrats. The danger for Democrats is not people voting for Donald Trump. We could indict him 91 more times. They're going to vote for Donald Trump. The danger is people staying home. The danger is people staying home if the Democratic Party does not become once again unequivocal advocates for the working people of the United States. I'm the one because I'm going to offer people a better life, an economic U-turn, a new beginning, a way to actually make your life better. Someone who's, Congress has been the problem. They would say that only those who know how to be part of that system that drove us into this ditch should possibly be considered qualified to lead us out of this ditch. But the problem is not that we don't have enough political car mechanics in Washington. The problem is that we're on the wrong road. I'm the one. to offer to people what I have done for the last 40 years. I have worked with people in times of crisis and despair. And the American people are in a time of constant crisis today and constant despair. I know about helping people endure a time of crisis and transform a time of crisis by saying the truth. The truth is that short-term profit maximization for huge corporations is now the bottom line. It now supersedes humanitarian values. It supersedes the safety, the health, and the well-being of the American people. In me, you'd have a president who says it like it is, lays it down like it is, and does something about it, and it's not just talk.
Don't do it. Hold it. I appreciate it. We try to keep it around a minute. Take as much time as you like on this, sir.
I believe I'm the type of president our country needs. And that is because I am dedicated to repairing this country, to celebrating people of all races, religions, politics, geographies. I'm disgusted by both parties having divided this nation. Angertainment would have us actually believe we're more divided than we really are. There's a reason I'm the second most bipartisan member out of 585 elected officials in Washington and our governors. I care deeply. I will wake up every single morning trying to repair our country. I also have unusual experience. I've built companies. I've been working in the private sector almost my whole life. I was the board chair of a health system. I was a regent at a university. I chaired the board of a philanthropic foundation. So I know the nonprofit world. And now I'm a third-term member of Congress. I have seen everything. And I see why things are not working in Washington. Why did Donald Trump win? A lot of people like the fact he was a businessman, but he gave business people like me a bad name. I've never declared bankruptcy. I've never had my philanthropy shut down because of unethical behavior in New York. I've not been indicted 4 times. My goodness, everybody. I can bring this country together. I have business experience. I attract independents. I flipped a district that had been red for 60 years, Democratic, because I use invitation, not confrontation. And that's exactly how I will win the presidency and beat Donald Trump or Nikki Haley. Remember, Joe Biden is losing to Nikki Haley by 17 points. 17 points. So if you want Nikki Haley as the opponent and you're a Democrat, be careful. Be careful.
Just a quick follow-up. Name one Republican, living or dead. I prefer living because it brings more context. Do you admire and you respect the way they handle their business and somebody you like to work with?
Let me tell you. In fact, Liz Cheney, and I'm talking with her this afternoon, and I'll tell you why. Because I was trapped in the House chamber on January 6th. 20 of us trapped. We had 20 minutes believing that our lives were coming to an end, contacting friends and family saying goodbye, because we assumed they had guns and they were coming for us. And when we escaped, and Liz Cheney was among us, we were set in a room, about 25 of us, Democrats and Republicans. We were watching a television screen, waiting for the United States president to end the insurrection, which he didn't for hours. But when he finally came on TV, Liz Cheney pointed to that screen and said, he's responsible and we're going to hold him accountable. And every one of us, Democrats and Republicans, applauded at the same time. She was the most conservative member of the Republican conference at that time, number 3 ranking member of their leadership. What happened to her? She lost her leadership post. She was excommunicated. She was primaried and she lost. I did an advertisement for Liz Cheney because I saw the unusual principle that I never see in Washington by her that day. And I'll tell you what, if you had told me 5 years ago I would have done an ad for Liz Cheney, I would have said you're out of your mind. But
thank you.
She is a principled American and I believe in her.
Thank you, sir. Republican you would like to work with and admire?
I not Liz Cheney. I admire and respect the congressman, but this is a way in which we really do have some differences that I believe the American people should understand. I do admire what Liz Cheney did standing up to Donald Trump, but none of us should be deceived. She voted with him 90%, 99% of the time. Dean has talked about how he wanted to bring, the fiscal responsibility of Republicans, businessmen into Congress. And let's be very clear. Dean, you did not do anything to support Medicare for all when you were in Congress for 3 terms. You did not do anything to support tuition-free college when you were in there. You say you have migrated over the last 2 months. I don't believe that this country should be run like a fiscally responsible business. I think this country should be run like a fiscally responsible family. And that is what we will do when I am president. We will put children first. We will put the earth first. And businesses can just step aside. Money is not created by a bunch of corporate overlords who drop jobs like crumbs from their Mount Olympus. Money comes from the creativity and the productivity of the American people. I will help people thrive. And that's where the money will come from. And stimulate it.
Of course, you get an opportunity to respond and take as much time as you like.
I agree with a lot of what Marianne is saying about what we need to do. But I tell you, the reason Democrats are losing losing national elections is because we're fiscally irresponsible. We have $33 trillion in debt. We spend $2 trillion a year more than we have every year. And now our debt service, the interest, our credit card, is going to be about $800 billion a year, meaning we don't have any money left to make the investments that we want. Yes, we have to make sure the wealthy and the well-connected pay their fair share. That's how we're going to do it. But to say that we don't have to manage our country responsibly, I'm afraid that's wrong. So let me say this about healthcare. I actually was an original co-sponsor of Ro Khanna's bill that's the State-Based Universal Health Care Act, which allows states to start implementing universal health care with a federal waiver. I've been spending my whole philanthropic life trying to afford college education to students who are worthy of it who cannot access capital. So to tell me that I'm not invested in college for all or Medicare for all, I did just sign the bill. Yeah, there's no question, because the bill is not perfect. I want healthcare for all. I want every single American, including the 26 million who have no healthcare. I want the 90 million who are underinsured, all to have health insurance nationally. I represent United Health Group in my district, the biggest health insurer in the world. Let me tell you, it isn't easy telling you the truth that their $21 billion a year in net income that they take off the table should be used to cover medical expenses for Americans. That's the truth.
We got to move on now. I'm sorry, the rules of the, you were not invoked, so the response, we do have a lot of issues we want to get to. And I appreciate, obviously, energy is always an issue in every election. Winter's coming, home heating oil is very expensive. So there's this push and pull all the time. And this question's for you, ma'am. First, how can we, being mindful of the climate, obviously, and its impact on it, what's the role of the federal government in developing an energy policy that's sustainable and can help us here in the Northeast?
I will declare a climate emergency, and we will begin immediately a mass mobilization for a just transition from a dirty economy to a clean economy. President Biden likes to call himself the climate president, and there have been healthy green investments in the Inflation Reduction Act, but all of those benefits have been nullified by the fact that he has given more oil drilling permits even than Donald Trump did. Plus, he okayed the Willow project and the LNG project in Alaska. We will create millions of jobs. We should be ramping down fossil fuel extraction, not ramping it up. And this will take time. Obviously, we will make major investments in solar, in wind, in everything that has to do with a green energy grid. At the same time, in states such as New Hampshire being an example, this must be a just transition. The government must compensate in any way necessary to make sure that there is no citizen in New Hampshire or in any other state in the United States that does not have the ability to stay warm during the winter.
Thank you, ma'am. Congressman?
Well, Josh, there are two issues embedded in your question, one of which is the cost of home heating oil here in the Northeast, $4 to $5 a gallon. That's why you have thousands of Granite Staters on wait lists right now for subsidies. We have an issue of costs. We also have an issue of national security. The fact that we continue to focus our policy on fossil fuels means that we are putting our country at risk. Why are we enriching Iran, Russia, the Saudis? It's nonsensical. But we can't burden all of you with the cost of that transition. And look, we did not leave the Stone Age because we ran out of rocks. We came up with better ways to do things, and we know what those things are. Wind. Wind is the least expensive form of electricity generation right now in the United States. Why? Because of federal investments and subsidies to create the technology. We know how to do it, but we should be a common sense country that migrates our way there so you are not burdened with costs. That's why I favor carbon fee and dividend. We put a price on carbon, we give an incentive to move to fossil fuel free economies, and we return the proceeds to the people who are economically impacted by it. But we operate on incentives and disincentives, and this government has done a terrible job to migrate to the decency and the fossil fuel free economy that we need.
Thank you very much, sir. Appreciate that. Now, a little bit of politics and topical issue in the news. Colorado Supreme Court. I'm sure you both know where I'm going with this. Maine Secretary of State has ruled that Donald Trump not qualified to be on the state's ballots because they declare he engaged in an insurrection against the United States on January 6th. It's been in the news quite a bit. New Hampshire Secretary of State has said that such an important constitutional decision cannot be made at the state level alone. So in your view, and we'll start with, I think it's your turn, Congressman, who should decide this question and why?
The Supreme Court should decide the question. That's why we have a Supreme Court. Americans are losing faith in the Supreme Court, which is one reason I wish we had 18-year term limits there, which is a whole nother conversation. Donald Trump is an unmitigated disaster. He's one of the most dangerous people in American history. I was subject to the insurrection that he inspired in the House chamber that day. All of you watched on TV. It was heartbreaking, disgusting, repulsive. With all that said, I'm very concerned because a majority of Americans favor him right now as our next president. That's the truth. And do I think it's appropriate for the legal system to take him off the ballots? Actually, I don't. I think he should be facing voters as the judge and jury, because if not, I'm very concerned about America's future, because I think violence will ensue. And I think it's better for our country, all of you, all of us on this stage and elsewhere, to mobilize to defeat him. That's why I'm running for president, because right now, Joe Biden is a risk to democracy because he is knowingly going into an election in which his approval numbers and his poll numbers make it almost impossible for him to win. I know Marianne feels the same way. We are the only two in the United States of America on the Democratic side of the aisle to stand up and tell you the truth. He's going to lose. He's going to lose.
Thank you, sir. Appreciate that. Same question for you, ma'am.
For the most part, I agree with everything that Dean said. Under normal circumstances, I do think it would be reasonable for the legal system to decide. But I share Dean's fear about this, his deep concern, and I do think it should be a decision made by the Supreme Court.
All right. Thank you very much. Appreciate that. So I couldn't help but notice we did coin flip out in the lobby a moment ago. You guys were very respectful of each other. You seem to genuinely like each other. And we don't see that a lot with our politicians.
Tell me about it.
Particularly opponents on stage. How do you get to a point to where you talk some of the extreme wings of your own party who've co-opted in a lot of ways? And we'll start with you, Marianne Williamson. How do you get them on board with bringing some civility back to the process?
I'm not worried about them. I'm worried about the American people. The horse race is not what matters to me. The majority of Republicans as well as Democrats want universal health care. The majority of Republicans as well as Democrats want tuition-free college and tech school. The majority of Americans, Republicans as well as Democrats, including gun owners, want common sense gun safety laws. I'm not concerned about the civility or lack of civility in Congress. I'm concerned about the fact that they do more to serve the short-term profit maximization of their donors than they do to serve the safety, health, and well-being of the American people. I do not expect that every congressman and senator will necessarily like me. And I don't want to bring a bunch of Republicans and fiscal responsibility people into my cabinet so much. They have failed. And what I want to do is to be an advocate for the American people. And some people actually in Congress would not like me. And I would feel about them the same way that Franklin Roosevelt did. He called the people who represent the interests of corporate America over the interests of the people the economic royalists. They came at him and they would come at me the same way, in Congress and out of Congress. They'd call me a socialist. They'd say everything that they said about him. And what he said was, I welcome their hatred. I'm not going into the presidency to be a people pleaser so that anybody in Congress would necessarily like me or not. They'd respect me. I'd be fair, and I would be fair in negotiation, but I would not be quiet when they were not serving the people. I would go straight with the bully pulpit to the American people, and I would let you know who is obstructing your best interest, who they were donated to by, what they were really doing in Washington. It would be you and me. They're secondary. Equal branch of the government, but I'd be tough. I'm sorry.
I'm sorry. Take a little extra time, sir. How would you bring it all together?
Well, I believe deeply in our Constitution, and the way our founders set up this country was we had to debate, deliberate, and then come to conclusions and solve our country's problems. That means we had to work together. George Washington warned us all about factions, about political parties. I told you earlier that is the biggest disaster in our country right now. With all that said, are we going to succeed by fighting each other? No. We're going to succeed by fighting for one another. And that is why I am proud to be the second most bipartisan member of Congress. That is why the first bill I had signed into law during the Trump administration was the Paycheck Protection Flexibility Act. I did it with Chip Roy. You all know who he is, the Freedom Caucus member. I'm the second most bipartisan member of Congress. He's probably 433. But I set out to become his friend early on. I got to know him because the Congress does everything to keep us separate. I will invest in working together. I will include Republicans at my table, because if we don't, we can never expect them to include us at their table. We have got to change this nonsense. We cannot succeed unless we start respecting one another. That starts in the White House, and that's exactly how I intend to do it as our president.
And I have separate questions for each of you on the same topic. And Congressman, how have establishment Democrats treated you in Washington since you announced your campaign for the
with
presidency.
extraordinary hypocrisy and meanness and attacks, and it is disgusting. And
I agree with you on that.
And I think, and I got to tell you all, I've learned a lot. And I think we all have to keep open minds and open hearts as we go through life to recognize that we don't know it all. And the party in which I believed and invested, I enabled, I was part of, I was a House Democratic leader elected by my peers just last year to serve as one of the leaders. I went from a darling to a devil. Why? For practicing democracy, my friends, for practicing democracy. I will not have one colleague endorse me, people who really had affection for me and still do. They can't do that because every one of them wants to get reelected and they don't want the Democratic Party to do to them what they're doing to me. Why do you think that Marianne and I are the only ones on the stage right now? Because people who actually aspire to lead the free world were too afraid to be on the stage for what the Democratic Party would do. The pain, it's hard. The pain is hard, but it is nothing like the pain being experienced by so many Americans, and I will persevere, I will take it, and I will take it all the way to the White House.
Great. Thank you, sir. Appreciate that. Please hold your applause. Ms. Williamson, along the same lines, we have to ask you a question. Listen, I mean, obviously the DNC has made their decision in a lot of ways. You're not being considered by establishment Republicans. This is the first and only debate that you've had. How do you go down there, achieve your agenda while also breaking up some of the probably hurt feelings of members of your own party?
The president does not have a magic wand. The president is not supposed to have a magic wand. As Dean himself pointed out, we have three co-equal branches of government. We've had Republican presidents who overreached and abused presidential power. But in my opinion, we've had some Democratic presidents who haven't used it enough, have been too much about these factions of men that actually, as Dean said, George Washington warned us about. He said political parties, he was afraid they would form factions of men who were more concerned with their party, with their faction, than with their country. And so these are sophisticated people, by the way. And once you become president, they understand that you are president. And they would feel, for me, great respect. They were elected by their constituents. They would feel my respect as that they're the members of Congress and members of the Senate. I'm sorry?
Probably a little sheepish, too.
I don't know about sheepish, but they would be aware that for the first time in a long time, there was a woman, well, first time was a woman, but the first time in a long time that there was a president who did not emerge from the political party structure, a president who emerged from the people. And there would be no doubt about it. I'm here to serve the people.
We have time for one more question before we get to closing statements. The hour goes by fast. Yeah. In response to the rising cases of flu, COVID-19, respiratory illnesses, mask recommendations and mandates have returned in 6 states already, mostly at hospitals. In your view, Congressman, when is it appropriate for the federal government to issue mask requirements?
Well, first of all, anybody who's ever been in a hospital knows that surgeons and healthcare practitioners who've spent years in school and see the numbers and work in laboratories know that masks work. They prevent the transfer of illness. So let me start with this. If we are a country that cares about one another, if we're all patriots, we should be protecting one another. That means if we are sick, we should stay home. That means if we are sick, we shouldn't blow our nose in our hands and then shake hands. We should do it in our elbows, right? It's not rocket science. Imagine if we had a president who simply told us how to do this a little bit better by taking care of each other. Americans do not respond well to mandates, period. I think we should protect one another. I think it is terribly dangerous right now. We have a trio of terrible viruses going around the country, again around the world. And we've lost faith in the very government that is supposed to be protecting us. That is the responsibility of presidents. Donald Trump spent that equity. Joe Biden has done almost nothing to restore it. Nothing to restore it. That's exactly what I'll do. I think mask mandates are actually dangerous because it's dividing our country. I think all of us should choose to do it when we're sick so we do not get others sick, period.
Thank you, Congressman. Mask mandates.
Well, we are undergoing a new surge of COVID right now, the largest since the Omicron. And we should be very concerned about that. And we should be very concerned about long COVID. Long haul COVID sufferers is something that the government should be putting far more attention on, not only in terms of treatment, which we will have with my whole health plan, universal health care, Medicare for all types situation, which, by the way, does as much to proactively create a healthy society in which we will be less vulnerable to such diseases as it does to treat diseases when they are among us. I do think it's time to be giving away some free masks and to be giving away some free tests now for people who want them. As far as mandates, that's left to the states, and I agree with Dean it's such a divisive topic at this point.
Thank you very much. Appreciate that. And we're to reach the point where we're going to have closing statements. We flipped a coin earlier, as I mentioned. I'm going to be, I got to keep the clock here. So try to keep it right around the 90-second mark so I don't have to cut anybody off.
You should be honest, we flipped a penny. I've never seen that before,
It's the only
actually.
thing I can find.
See, times are tough. You see, we had to use a penny. Look, I started this. First of all, thank you. The courage of you all showing up and being participants is beautiful, remarkable, and I love you all. I don't care about your politics, and I mean that sincerely. I started by telling you I'm going to say the quiet part out loud. I'm doing it now, and I'm going to do it as your president. And I'm going to end this the same way. Joe Biden should have been right here with us today.
I agree with that.
He is taking the Granite State for granted. He is taking this election for granted, and he is taking every single one of you and this entire country for granted. He should be campaigning in New Hampshire. He should be showing up in front of voters. He should be on the ballot in New Hampshire, for goodness sakes. He's the president of the United States of America. And we all know this. But instead, we are seeing literally the hypocrisy of democracy. It is not protecting democracy when you remove your competitors from the ballot, as he has done in Florida and North Carolina. It is not protecting democracy when you refuse to even participate in a single debate in the United States of America. It is not protecting the soul of the nation when the nation is more divided than ever. And it is not protecting us when we have an unmitigated disaster at our border and 60% of Americans are living paycheck to paycheck and 40% cannot afford a $400 emergency. That is not protecting democracy. That's actually why democracy is failing right now all around the world, because people cannot maintain their lives. It's too expensive. So that's why I'm running for president. That's why I'm in Congress. I'm trying to create change. And I will be that change, a new generation to represent all of you. Some of you will be in my White House because I need you. If you're ready for it, please go to dean24.com. I would love for you to join the Dean team, join this movement, and replace the past, and let's move to the future. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you very much. 1 second. You can applause all you want in a moment. Please take your time.
We don't need another political car mechanic. The problem is that we're on the wrong road. We don't need another technocrat. We need someone with vision. We have very difficult problems in this country today. And in addition to all the threats to democracy that Biden has spoken about and that Dean has spoken about, such as the president not even being here, the greatest threat to our democracy is the destruction of the American middle class and the failure of our government to restore it. This is tough. This is a very difficult time. But we have had ancestors who rose to the challenge before. We responded to slavery with abolition. We responded to the institutional suppression of women with the women's suffrage movement. We responded to the Gilded Age with the establishment of organized labor, and we responded to segregation with the civil rights movement. It's our turn now. We will respond to the institutional greed of a matrix of corporate overlords. That is how we will get out of this mess. We need an economic U-turn. I don't want to go to Washington and fight for you. I want to go to Washington and co-create with you a new chapter in American history. The same forces I would have to be dealing with in Washington, you have to deal with here in Concord. Because there are undemocratic forces in our country today, just as there have been in other generations. Let's not be the first generation to wimp out on doing what it takes to put this country back on track. Government has become a puppet, a system of legalized bribery to the powers of the corporate interests, which are their donor base. That will end with me. I will stand up to that. And my presidency will be one in which not only in Washington, but throughout this country, there will be such a sense that we, the American people, are on the move. We will be once again a government of the people, by the people, and for the people. And all of us will know.
Let's hear it for Dean Phillips and Marianne Williamson for being here.
Thank you. Thank you.
And thank you all for joining us here today. For those listening on SiriusXM, have a great night. Don't forget to vote.
Everybody.
Thank you, Pastor.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.